When you start tooling leather, the idea of shading can be such a mystery. That's why in this video, I want to break it down and simplify it by giving you a few simple guidelines to follow to make putting your shading into leather a whole lot easier. Let's head over to the tooling bench and get started. The reason that we're adding shading is to add depth. Now, there's a difference between adding depth and changing depth. So if we look here at this half that's already tooled up, you can see the backgrounds where we've pushed those backgrounds down and matted those down. In those spots, we just changed the depth. We pushed that leather down so that actually stands up the rest of our tooling. So our tooling's up here, our backgrounds are down here. That has changed the depth now. But to add depth, we want to add dimension to our petals, to these leaves and vines in here. So that's what the shading is doing. It's this darker burnish area out here that fades off. So if we did too much and just kept running our tool and shading this all in, all we would be doing is changing the depth and dropping that all down, similar to how we did in the backgrounds, instead of adding depth by only shading in certain areas. So next, what tool am I using to do my shading? There's two options that are very common, and the first one is going to be a pear shader. This is a tool that's a smaller teardrop shaped or pear shaped type of tool. It's a bit rounded on the face of that and a bit rounded to the side there as well. Some of them are smooth, some have texturing like this one, others have lines either vertical going along that tool or horizontal going sideways. All just different texturing, and it's personal preference. But this is a common shading tool. However, it's not my favorite tool. My favorite tool to shade with is actually called a thumbprint. Now, a thumbprint tool is a longer tool. It's wider on one end and narrower on the other, and so there's really two sides of it that you can use depending on where you're trying to fit into. But this particular one is a vertical line thumbprint, so meaning these texture lines on here are running vertical along with that tool. Same as the pear shader, these will come checkered with that texturing on there or horizontal line. This tool right here is my personal preference for shading. This is actually a step up from the beginner tool. We have a beginner vertical line thumbprint right here. This is one we have available on the website, and this is great to get started with. It's an inexpensive tool, and we can do the same job with it. Big difference is this one's just a little more squared off at your ends, as opposed to this one here that's a little bit rounded there. So I really like that extra little feature to this. Now this nicer tool that I have upgraded to, this is a Berry King tool. This very particular one is a Berry King vertical lined #2 thumbprint. So the #2 is the sizing on that if you're wanting to get the same exact tool. This we don't offer on our website, but you could go directly to Berry King and get that yourself. Now, where do we run our tools at? This is a big thing, right? Where do we want that shading at? Because we talked about needing it in certain spots. We want to take advantage of the unshading, but we also want to know where to shade. So when we look at our vines, let's jump out here, clear out to the end, and look at a sticker vine. This is going to be a common type of vine that's in a lot of your tooling, and it's a very simple place to start with. We're going to look at, we have a concave line, or a convex, excuse me, I'm trying to tell you and I'm telling you backwards. We have a convex line right here, and that just means the rounded one, this one that's rounded out. Or you have a concave, that longer concave one that's going in, right? So your convex and your concave. Again, one that goes in or your little rounded one. Let's keep it simple. What I want to do is I want to shade a heavier, darker area out on the outside edge of this and then fade it back towards that convex or the inside curve. What's that look like? It looks like right out here. We've got a nice dark, high, deep burnish, which is that dark color, and that comes from striking our tool down, creates this little highlighted ridge, but that shading then fades off as we move down our vine towards this concave side. That little rule is what we're going to use to go through this entire thing. We have a rounded edge here. We're going to put a little shading on. This turns concave. It goes in, so we lighten our shading up. This one's rounded. I darken that shading down a little bit. And everywhere towards the center of these vines, heading down here, we're fading that out. Same thing here. We have a rounded line. We put some shading. Comes concave, we lighten it off. A little rounded spot there. We're fading it in. Out here, this rounded edge, put that highlighted ridge, the darker shading, fade that off down your vine. By fading it off quick, we start adding that depth in that vine there. Now here we got this shading that comes right up underneath here. That's more of a special case where these ones that turn over, like this petal here is rolled back over on itself. So that's just showing that back side of that. All of our other shading is out towards that rounded edge, lightens up in the concave and that inside curve, and darkens back where it's the rounded curve. So let's put that to practice over here and see how it's done. So with that thumbprint tool, I'm going to tip that a little bit out towards the end here because I don't want to get my full tool impression. We're just hitting part of that. Now every time that I'm striking that tool down with my maul, I'm moving it just slightly. And I lighten that pressure off. So we keep that shading out towards our rounded edge, lighten back off as we go down the vine and closer to that concave or inside curve. Same thing here. We have a rounded curve out here. My tool's pointing back down that vine where it came from. We're getting that dark shading there. We come into the concave or the inside curve, so I'm going to lighten it off. And it fades out. And now we're going to run some shading out here on this outside curve. Lighten it off as we go. So again, all that shading is dark on the outside curve and then lightens off as we go into that vine and back down it. Deeper shading out where it's rounded, fading that down the vine, fading it into the petal. We have an inside curve here that we lighten up, and an outside curve that we get a little darker. And it all fades off. This simple rule we can follow all the way through here. We have this short rounded curve. A little darker shading there. Fades off down our vine towards the inside curve. An outside curve and another outside curve. So I'm tipping that tool. Putting our shading there, and that just creates some depth and makes a little ridge in the middle of that stump there. Lighten up on the inside curve. Add some darker shading around the outside. Getting close to that edge, creating that little ridge on the outside. And that's why I'm coming in and shading after I've done my bevel work. I've already beveled the outside of these lines. That allows me to create this little ridge when I come in and do my shading. Now there's always exceptions to every rule, but following these simple guidelines is going to take you through 95% of your pattern and get you a whole lot closer to dialing in your shading game when it comes to leather tooling. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more tips and tricks that we share here to help you get started in the Leathercraft game.